Getting tossed around. Time to role model, let them doubts drown. They can't hold me down. They can't hold me down. Nah, I'm gonna motivate.
All right, Fourth String Podcast. It is a packed Tuesday, almost said Wednesday, Tuesday night. We've got new college football playoff rankings, which I'm stoked to go over. I've got, of course, my annoyances with the committee, which we'll talk about. I spent so much of Thursday, Friday, Saturday watching football. I love this time of year when we get coaching movement. I think it's fascinating to watch this all play out. We call it silly season for a reason. You never really know what's true. We've got Mike Elko, or actually we had Mark Stoops last week. Looked like he was going to be the A&M coach. Then all of a sudden he's not. Then it's Mike Elko. I swear it is Lane Kiffin and Hugh Freeze all over again. And the way Mike Elko left, absolutely awful. So we're going to talk about A&M later. Are they an elite job? I think you're going to be fascinated to see what program A&M actually is comparable to. And this blew me away looking at this earlier, but we're going to talk about that. First, let's start off with these new college football playoff rankings. So here is our top 10. I think 7 of these have a real shot to get into the playoff based on any scenario. So here's our new top 10. Georgia 1, Michigan 2, Washington 3, Florida State 4, Oregon 5, Ohio State 6, Texas 7, Alabama 8, Missouri 9, Penn State comes in at 10. So there's your top 10. Now, nobody outside of the top 10 has a chance to make the playoff. We know that. So let's take out some teams that even in the top 10 don't have a chance. Missouri and Penn State. They're both 2-loss teams. We've never had a 2-loss team make it into the playoff. This year, I don't see any scenario in which that changes. Those 2 teams can't get in. So now you've got the other 8. Out of those 8 teams, all of them are playing this weekend except for one, Ohio State. And I don't think because Ohio State isn't playing this weekend, I don't think there's a scenario in which they get in. I don't think, although it's possible, I don't think all 4 of our top 4 teams, Georgia, Michigan, Washington, Florida State, I don't think all 4 are going to lose. If Washington loses, they're losing to a team ranked ahead of Ohio State. So that doesn't really even help Ohio State. And Washington's got arguably the best resume of any team in the country right now. So they're only going to fall so far. I can't imagine, even with a loss, Ohio State would move above Washington because of who Washington would lose to. So Florida State would have to lose, Washington would have to lose, Michigan would have to lose, and Georgia would have to lose for Ohio State to really have a shot to get in, and I just don't see it. Now, Texas, if they win and one of these teams loses, I think you could absolutely argue, like if Florida State gets dropped on Saturday in the ACC championship game, I think you could absolutely argue Texas would move ahead of Ohio State and Florida State with a win. That I think could happen. Alabama, I think the chances are slim, but keep in mind, Georgia's ranked number 1. The importance of Georgia beating number 1 is that Alabama, if they were to win, it's not just that they win an SEC championship, they would beat the number 1 team in the country. Is that enough to push them over Texas? Because again, we can talk about, well, head-to-head doesn't matter. I disagree. Head-to-head matters, but it's not everything. So it's not just the fact that Texas beat Alabama head-to-head, but now you're talking about 2 12-1 teams, and you're talking about Alabama coming off of a win over the number 1 team in the country, whereas Texas would be coming off of a win against Oklahoma State. If Alabama beats Georgia, that is way more impressive than Texas beating Oklahoma State. So I could absolutely see Alabama, and I think it would be a lot, but I think I could see them moving up into that 4 spot if everything plays out in their favor and they knock off Georgia, I think they could get in. I do not think Ohio State can get in. I just don't see it. Now, looking at these rankings, I've got some major problems. The first big problem I have is with Georgia being ranked number 1 and Florida State being ranked number 4. We've got to figure out what is the methodology on this. If it's based on resume, Florida State should be ranked number 1. Now, why aren't they? Why is, out of these undefeated teams, why is Florida State ranked 4th out of the 4 undefeated teams that have a chance to play for the playoff? It's because Jordan Travis is injured. That's the only reason that makes any sense at all, is he's out and the committee is penalizing Florida State for it. And I'm fine with that logic, because that logic would say we're ranking teams based on what we see with our eyes. But if you're ranking teams based on what you see with your eyes, I'm sorry. I watched Georgia play Georgia Tech on Saturday. They didn't look good. And you can argue, oh, well, rivalry games are always close. They're not always close, because Georgia has crushed Georgia Tech before. But if you actually go and watch that game, Georgia Tech was pushing around Georgia. And I was watching that game with, I don't know what you call this type of relative, but basically my cousin's husband is a cousin-in-law type of thing. Like, I don't know. He's super cool. He's a big Georgia fan. And we're sitting there watching this game together. And I'm like, dude, Georgia Tech is pushing their offensive line, pushing Georgia's defensive line around. Like, they are playing more physical against Georgia than Georgia is. And he's sitting there going, yeah, I agree. Georgia's getting pushed around. They're getting beat physically. That's not the number 1 team in the country. Right now, today, based on the eye test, that's not the number 1 team in the country. So if we're going to go by eye test and you want to put Florida State 4 or even lower, I've got no problem with it. I like the eye test. But if you're going to do that, you can't simultaneously tell me what you saw from Georgia was more impressive than what you saw from Michigan, or gracious, what you saw from Oregon. If we're going on eye test, and eye test only, Oregon should probably be the number 1 or number 2 team in the country. They are playing better football than anybody in the country. If we're going on resume, it shouldn't be Georgia either. And it should probably be Florida State at 1 or 2. So I just wish the committee would be honest in what criteria are they using to rank Georgia 1 and Florida State 4. By the way, I've got Nick Pretty messaging me. Well, I was trying to get him on the podcast because I would like Nick Pretty and I to just absolutely go at each other over this whole fandom thing. I think it would be great content. We've been trying to make it happen forever. I don't know when it's going to happen, but at some point it's going to happen. Probably will help if I can ask him to come on more than 30 minutes before I start, but that's neither here nor there. So back to the topic, because I'm a squirrel and I get distracted. The ranking system and the methodology therein makes absolutely no sense and follows no consistent logic. So here is right now my top 10. So my number 1 team in the country, based on everything I've seen, is Michigan. And I thought the way they played Ohio State was perfect. Now, everybody today is talking about Harbaugh and the fact that he's out and missed 6 games and Michigan won them anyways, that is reason for why Harbaugh is not a good coach. I couldn't push back anymore. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's proof that Harbaugh is an amazing coach. It's actually proof. It's not indicative of his inability to coach. It's indicative of how well that team is pieced together. Number 2, Oregon. I'm just telling you, they are obliterating people heading into the playoffs. If you watched any NFL playoffs in the past, there's always a team that gets on this big run and this big push towards the end of the season. The Bengals did this 2 years ago. And it's not just that they're beating people, they are obliterating good teams. That's what Oregon's doing. The Pac-12 is the toughest conference in college football and has been all year long. And Oregon's had no trouble since that game at Washington. At Washington, a game they lost by 3. That is easily right now, today, the second best team in the country. Georgia, I've got at number 3. I've watched them all year. I've had major concerns about the offense. I have some concerns about the defense now, even too. And you watch that Georgia Tech game, Georgia had opportunities to completely take control of that game, and they never did. And they let Georgia Tech get back into it. And I'm sorry, but if you're letting Georgia Tech get back into a game that you should have had control over, you have no business being ranked the number 1 team in the country. And I think Georgia's going to struggle in these playoff games. I'm not saying they can't win it all. They've won it back-to-back years. It is like nobody three-peats, by the way. So nobody three-peats. I think it's going to be really tough. I've got them at number 3. They're still a great team, but you cannot tell me that if you watch that game on Saturday against Georgia Tech, you can't tell me that you don't have concerns about Georgia. That was a really, really sloppy game. My number 4 team is Washington. They have arguably one of the best resumes in college football, and if you continue to watch them, Michael Penix is great. The only thing I look at with Washington that's got me a little bit concerned, I don't think they are as good at the line as, say, Oregon is. Oregon's incredible at the line. When you're that good at the line of scrimmage, that can separate you. And if you look at when Oregon's gotten to the playoff before, like they did this under Chip Kelly, when they've gotten to the playoff before and they've struggled, it's not been because they didn't have skill players. It's been because they've been dominated at the line of scrimmage. Oregon didn't have that problem this year. I think Washington might, so I've thrown them in at 4. I really struggled with 5 and 6, but I've got Texas at number 5. I think Texas is playing some incredible football right now. I really do. They're crushing teams. They're rolling into the Big 12 championship, just looking absolutely incredible. Offense is clicking. Defense looks good. If you look at Texas's roster, I don't know where the concern is. My only pushback is Steve Sarkisian in big games. And I know they beat Alabama on the road earlier in the year, but they still lost that game to Oklahoma. I need to see them against Oklahoma State. I need to see them come out and wallop Oklahoma State. It shouldn't be a close game. But if you look at that, that is one coach that Sarkisian has had trouble beating in the past. This is going to be a tough game for Texas. I've got them at 5, but I have my concerns. At number 6, I have Alabama. I know we can talk about the game against Auburn and the Iron Bowl being close, and they went on a hope and a prayer, and I get all of it. I do. The difference is that game is at Auburn. The difference is Auburn got every break in the world to even be in that spot. And the difference is Alabama never had any real opportunity to completely take control of that game. So I don't want to compare that game to Georgia and Georgia Tech, because it's completely different games. People don't realize the Iron Bowl, how hard of a game that is to win on the road. And it doesn't matter. Style points in the Iron Bowl literally don't matter. Georgia Tech and Georgia, absolutely, because even fans in Atlanta don't know that Georgia Tech has a stadium in downtown. They don't know. They forget about it. Like, Georgia Tech's one of the most unforgettable FBS Power 5 programs, and I apologize to my cousin Bobby. He's a huge fan. Nobody knows they exist. Auburn's a completely different story. So for Alabama to go in there and pull off that win, that is something. Even if it was a miracle, even if it's one of the craziest plays, it is still something. Number 7, Ohio State. I've been saying it since the start of the year. The quarterback situation is not right. And you watch that game. Ohio State had every break. Michigan loses a big offensive lineman. Michigan can't get in the end zone when they need to. They're not able to put them away. Ohio State starting to drive. And what happens? Kyle McCord, not a 5-star quarterback, a 4-star quarterback. Kyle McCord makes a bad decision, underthrows the ball while getting hit, and it gets picked. It is so on point for my criticism of what Ohio State's been all year, for them to lose on a Kyle McCord interception, because that's been their weakness. They've got the defense. They've got the skill position players. Marvin Harrison Jr., he's the best player in the country. Bar none, he's the best player in the country. Ohio State lost that game because of Kyle McCord. And it's like I said in the preseason, Ryan Day has not coached a team without a 5-star quarterback until this year. This team defensively won a lot of games. Offensively, there were multiple weeks, if you paid attention, there were multiple weeks where this offense struggled to move the ball. And you can have a great player like Marvin Harrison, but you cannot rely on one great receiver to bail you out against that talented of a football team. I've got Ohio State at 7, but they've been right at 7 with me all season long. I'm not going to move them for that loss because I expected them to lose, but I'm sure as heck not going to move them up like some other people are. Number 8, Florida State. Again, I go by eye test. No Jordan Travis. This isn't the same team. They've got a great resume. If you want to argue they should be in the playoff, that's fine. It's not the same team. 9th, I have Missouri. I wish Missouri could play Georgia this Saturday. It's so weird. Like, I think Alabama probably could give them a tough game, but I think Missouri is clicking at the right time. The problem is they got 2 losses, so there's no way they're getting into this playoff. But my goodness, has this team been good the past several weeks? And Elijah Drinkwitz, you talk about a team hanging on to a coach and continuing to give them a chance. Boy, has that paid off, because Missouri is a really, really good team. And if you look at them going into next year, they are going to be one of the top SEC teams. I mean, they just are. They've got talent all around. They're playing some great football. They're crushing teams. I love what we're getting from Missouri. Number 10, I have LSU. If you look at LSU, they've got 2 losses. Both have been close. Both have been tough games. What this team has is an incredible offense. What they don't have is anything on defense. It's why they're at 10th. And I'll be honest with you, I think there is a big gap between 9 and 10. I do. But that team, Missouri, that all of us love, let's keep in mind, LSU is one of the 2 teams to knock off Missouri. And that is because of Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels right now should be the Heisman front runner, and it should not be close. Because of him, I've got LSU at number 10. I think they're an incredible team. And if they just had a shred of defense, I mean, just a shred of defense, this LSU team would be in the playoff conversation. They remind me a lot of USC last year. I mean, they do. They've got a quarterback basically keeping them alive. They don't have a defense, and ultimately that's costing them a spot in the playoff. All right, let's talk about that Michigan game, because I thought that game was fascinating. A lot of people, their takeaway from that game is Harbaugh, because he missed 6 games and Michigan won all of them, Harbaugh's not as good of a coach. Mike is going crazy here. I would argue the opposite. Let's keep in mind that Harbaugh's value of being on the sideline is only to manage the game. All the work is done the 6 days prior to game day. The research, the game planning, the practicing, the developing. Well, Harbaugh's been with the team all throughout the season. Harbaugh is still in charge of those game plans. He's still in charge of the practice plan, the development plan, the recruiting plan, all of that. That's all him. If you take any of those things away, this team's not winning these games. Just the fact that he's not on the sideline. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. In fact, in that game, and I'm sitting there watching this with my cousin-in-law, and I said, look, the way this game's playing out, for them to be up by 6 in this position where it's coming down to the last minute, this last few minutes is where they wish they had Harbaugh on the sideline. But that's it. The other 56, 57 minutes, it didn't really matter. They had the game plan. They knew what they were going to do. They knew what adjustments to make. They knew all of that going into the game. The last few minutes is where that mattered. It's not indicative to me of Harbaugh's ability to coach, whether or not he's on the sideline or not. I think they're better with him there, obviously, but I think the bigger point to take away from that is Michigan beat the team that everybody else has had either 1 or 2 or 3. Michigan beat them without their coach on the sideline. Is that not all the more impressive that Harbaugh has built this roster, has built this staff, has built this system and these game plans to where even when he leaves, they can still win. That is incredibly impressive to me. And it's why I've got Michigan ranked number 1, because I don't think there is another team capable of missing their coach on the sideline and still winning a game that big. I don't think Bama could do it. Georgia maybe, but I really don't. I think they needed Kirby Smart this past weekend to beat Georgia Tech. I think there's very few teams that would be capable of doing that. Now, on the other side of the field of that game, you have Ryan Day, and there have to be concerns about Ohio State. His record against everybody else, he doesn't lose, but he can't beat Michigan. Are you okay if you're Ohio State? Ask yourself this right now. Are you okay if you never win another Big Ten championship? Or for the next 10 years, you don't win another Big Ten championship? Are you okay with that? Are you okay if Michigan owns this rivalry? Because 3 in a row, boy, it's starting to trend on. They own you now. It's starting to get to that point. 3 in a row, that's unprecedented. That doesn't happen when you are Ohio or the Ohio State University. There have to be serious questions on Ryan Day. And I know, how can you fire a coach that just made the playoff and went 11-1? I'm not saying you do fire him. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think if you're Ohio State's boosters or you're the AD or you're a fan, you feel great about him and that staff today. I don't think you do. I think you got to look around and go, Michigan continues to get the better of us. In these big games, we come up short. Take that Georgia game in the playoff last year. I realize it's the playoff, and those games are hard to win. But didn't it come down to Ryan Day's mismanagement of the game in the end that cost Ohio State winning that game? Wasn't it that? So how is it in this game, final few minutes, and we can blame Kyle McCord all we want? Like, I think, and again, my criticism of Kyle McCord has not been that he's not a good quarterback. My criticism of Ohio State and Ryan Day has been Ryan Day's never won without a 5-star quarterback. And I didn't think this year, when they took a downgrade at quarterback, they were going to be better than they were last year. I didn't buy it. CJ Stroud was a necessary component to this team last year. So if you look at that, why is it you can't have a better game plan with a few minutes left in the game to go down the field and get in the end zone? It's a big game. I understand those are hard moments, but you're getting paid handsomely to win those big games. Ohio State's not paying you as much as they're paying you to go beat Indiana. You beat Indiana by the sheer fact that you are Ohio State. Ohio State's paying you lots of money to knock off Michigan and to ensure that you reign supreme over everybody in the Big Ten. Not everybody but Michigan, everybody in the Big Ten. There has to be a real conversation about, is Ryan Day the right guy for the job? And if not, what is that metric? What is that line where you say, we got to move on? Because I don't know what it is. I honestly, I would have a hard time saying we're going to fire a guy that's going 11-1. I'd have a hard time doing it. But I think I have a harder time accepting that this program, which has dominated the conference, dominated that rivalry, been a mainstay in the playoff, that all of a sudden they can't get there anymore. And that would not sit well with me. All right, let's talk about Caleb Williams. So Caleb Williams had an incredibly disappointing season, as did USC. And a lot of people are pointing the finger at Alex Grinch, the defense. Others are pointing the finger at Lincoln Riley. I think we need to point a lot of the finger at Caleb Williams. I don't think, and again, he's talented. That's fine. I don't think the way in which he's managed himself or his emotions have been great. I don't like watching a game and you see at the end, Caleb Williams is on the sideline sobbing. I don't like it. He's coming across to me as passive aggressive. He's coming across to me as ungrateful. He's coming across to me as somebody who doesn't see past the obstacles, doesn't have a resolution to win regardless, has a lot of excuses. He's really talented. I'm not going to lie. But you hear a lot of stuff from him and you don't really see him take his game to the next level in these big games. Keep in mind, USC, it's not like they're 9-3, a little bit disappointing. They're 7-5. I mean, we literally didn't you just fire Clay Helton because he was going 7-5 about every season? So 7-5 is not the expectation for USC. Expectation is 9-10 wins a year minimum, and really 2 out of every 4 years we're competing for a playoff. That's the expectation. So this is a massive disappointment for Lincoln Riley, USC, and Caleb Williams. So I'm looking at Caleb Williams going into this draft. And the other thing that happened over the weekend that I think Caleb Williams should take a really hard look at is the Panthers fired Frank Reich. Now, I'm a big Panthers fan. You can see in the background. Whoops. Wrong side. You can see in the background. I've got this back here. I've got all sorts of stuff back here. I'm a big Panthers fan. The Panthers right now are one of the most dysfunctional organizations in the NFL. Coach is already fired. GM and owner have no idea what they're doing. The new coach next year, when that coach comes in, that means for Bryce Young, that is 3 coaches in 2 years. Because keep in mind, you had Frank Reich, you've got the interim coach replacing him, and then you're going to have the new coach. So 3 coaches, 3 different offenses in 2 years for Bryce Young. That is going to crush his growth. There's very, very few quarterbacks who are talented enough, and maybe Caleb Williams is one of them, who are talented enough to overcome dysfunction. Andrew Luck's one of the closest we've seen. And even Andrew Luck, even though he overcame it, his career was significantly impacted by the dysfunction of the Colts. So if I were Caleb Williams and I'm looking at this year, you've got the Panthers firing Frank Reich. You've got the Bears playing last night. They can't get into the end zone with Justin Fields as their quarterback. There's talk they're moving on from Justin Fields, and they have the Panthers pick, so which means Chicago is going to have the number 1 pick. If I were Caleb Williams, I would come out right now and I would say, I'm not going to play for the Bears. I'm not going to do it. And if Chicago drafts me, I will demand a trade. And you can say, okay, wasn't that contrary to just everything that you said? Is that Caleb Williams is soft? Yes, it is. So why would I recommend Caleb Williams do that? If I think he's so soft, why would I recommend to it? Because I think sometimes your weakness, you should lean into it more. I don't like that Caleb Williams is soft or that he's crying on the sideline. It's not my thing. But here's the thing. He's so talented that if he demanded to be traded, it's not like he's not going to get drafted. It's not like he's going to slip out of the first round. He probably won't even slip out of the top 5. He's still going to get drafted. And now you kind of open up the door that somebody's going to trade for you. But are you really willing to hitch your career to that level of dysfunction? And if he falls out of the top pick or out of the top 5 or out of the top 10, so what? Let Drake May go play for Chicago. Let me know how it works out. You want to know where Caleb Williams would be great at? Green Bay. That'd be a great place for him to go. Tampa. That'd be a great place for him to go. They're not dysfunctional. I hate them, but they're not dysfunctional. They draft well. They work free agents well. They don't get into bad contracts. They keep coaches around. They don't fire coaches every 5 minutes. They're not dysfunctional. Dallas. I mean, would Dallas let Caleb Williams sit behind Dak for a year? Like, there's all sorts of options that Caleb Williams would have if the Rams stay in his backyard if he demanded a trade. And I think teams would look at it. They would say, gosh, this kid's soft. He's crying on the sidelines. Are we sure he's our guy? Nope. And they're going to pass on him. And the teams that do that will be the dysfunctional teams. If you watch if you watch the really, really good teams in the NFL, they are the ones who know how to look past that, find talent with a determination to win, and those are the guys that get drafted. I think if I were Caleb Williams, I would absolutely demand to be traded if Chicago drafts him. I'd have a list of teams say, look, if these teams draft me, I'm going to demand to be traded. You just don't go there. I have a list of 31 teams. Maybe you have a list of like 4 or 5, right? So we're not getting crazy with this thing. But I think you have a list. If these few teams draft me, I will not play there. And if you look at it, I mean, does anybody care that Bryce Young went number 1 today? Nope. Everybody looks at Bryce Young and says, oh, that's a failure. That thing is not working. It's a big bust. I don't think Bryce Young's a bust, but I think his career is not trending the right direction at all. I think there are big, major concerns. Okay, so the other thing that happened over the weekend, really it happened Monday at like 2 a.m. Mike Elko took the job at Texas A&M. The way you leave, guys are really bad about breakups, really bad. I do think, and I used to not believe this, but I do think the way you leave means a lot. I think it says a lot about your character. And the way Mike Elko did this is absolutely pathetic. But let's have a real conversation about Texas A&M. Because I think Mike Elko, as much as I dislike him today, I think he's a really I think he's a really good coach. But is Texas A&M an elite job? And just think on it. Is Texas A&M an elite job? And I think a lot of people would jump in and say no. But okay, what are the metrics that make up a coaching job? Like if you were going to be a college football coach and you're this up and coming coach, what would be things that would mean a lot to you? Salary, that'd be one. Access to elite recruits, sure, absolutely. Would you want a board that's going to be impatient? You want a patient board? No, you want a patient board. And so those would all be things. You want to get paid a lot of money. You want to be able to get the best recruits. You want a board that's going to give you time to build a roster and a coaching staff the way you want to. Okay, so how does Texas A&M fit in all those boxes? Pay more money than anybody. I mean, you saw Jimbo Fisher's buyout. Mike Elko is going to make $7 million a year. He's got all these incentives, by the way, to make a bunch more money. So they pay a bunch of money. They have the most access to recruits. They've had some of the top recruiting classes because they literally will just pay more than anybody else. So you look at the recruiting classes, Texas A&M is crushing it, and they have been for a long time. And then, okay, patience from the boosters and the board. Okay, they held on to Jimbo for 5 years. They held on to Kevin Sumlin for 6. They don't move on from guys super quick. They will, I mean, it may not be the most functional place, but they will give you time to figure it out. They will absolutely do that. So if it's not an elite job, just forget the success for a minute or lack thereof and just think about the metrics of the job. If it's not an elite job, what is it missing? Because I legitimately don't know. I mean, I've played around with this thing. I have no idea. Even the weather's great. The income tax is great. If you're an up and coming coach, why would Texas A&M not be one of the best possible jobs you could get? Yet, Texas A&M never hires the best coach available. They can never get them. And they always fall short of expectations. So if we just look at the history of success, and we'll span multiple coaches, right? Because a great job, you're eventually going to get the right guy. Over like a 30-year period, you're going to get the right guy at some point, right? I mean, Miami's been great. Alabama figures it out. USC has figured it out. They're figuring it out now. Texas is rebounding. Like over time, if you're a great job, you're going to figure it out and get the right guy. So since 1994, Texas A&M has had 2 finishes in the top 10. That's it. They've had 6 top 25 finishes since 1999. And since 1998, they've had one double-digit win season. So, I'm giving you credit all the way back to the 90s. Okay, so we're going back to 94, almost 30 years, 2 top 10 finishes since 94, 6 top 25 finishes since 99, and 1 double-digit win season since 1998. Okay, so hold on to that. So who else has a resume that's similar to this? So I'm going to give you a team, and here's what it looks like. So since 1998, this team is finished ranked 11 times. Okay, so in A&M, 6 top 25 finishes since 99. This team, 11 times they've been ranked since 1998. Since 1998, they've been ranked twice in the top 10. That's pretty on par with A&M, twice in the top 10 since 98. And since then, they've had 9 double-digit win seasons. So way more than A&M, actually. So top 25, a little bit more. Top 10, equal. Way more double-digit win seasons. Okay, so the team I'm mentioning here is Utah. So over the past 30 years, Utah's been on par and really even a little bit more successful than Texas A&M. But here's the other thing. Since 1998, Utah spent 12 of those years in the Mountain West, not even in the Pac-12. So based on success, based on the past 30 years of history, Utah and Texas A&M actually run about parallel to each other. When you think of A&M and you think of Utah, do you think of those two teams being about the same level of job? Of course not. But historically, based on the numbers, that is what Texas A&M is. They are not this elite job. But I don't know what is missing other than the win-loss record. I literally can't put my finger on what is missing. So if it's not elite, what else would that job need to be an elite job? And it makes no sense to me. I have no idea. Just being honest with you. Plug in every metric. Where does Texas A&M miss? They've got the fans. They have a massive alumni. What do they miss? I legitimately don't get it. All right. There's your fourth string podcast. I think Michigan State, by the way, hired Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. I think it's a solid hire. I think, okay, before we go, let's have an honest conversation about the coach stuff. I absolutely hate the timing of this. I just do. No other sport is like this, where you have players and kids being told, your coach is here, he's good, he's not leaving, and overnight he's gone. No other sport has it. Even college basketball does not have this. So how does college football, how is it so far removed from college basketball in terms of the coaching carousel? College basketball's got it figured out. The Final Four weekend is when it all happens. Final Four weekend is when new teams, or it's when teams fire coaches. It's when teams get new coaches. It's when all the movement happens. Okay, well, the season's over for every team but 4 teams. Those teams don't lose their coaches. So every team but 4 teams, the season's over. They're moving on. It's not impacting the players so much. But in college football, I mean, this is crazy that you just have up and overnight Jonathan Smith gone to Michigan State the day after playing Oregon. And you got to think, was Jonathan Smith really prepared for that game against Oregon? Do you think he didn't know going into that game against Oregon he was going to be coaching Michigan State the next day? Of course he knew. So did he really prep for Oregon? No. And we saw this from Lane Kiffin last year. It's gotten so bad to the point where the month of November is almost unwatchable for some of these teams because the play deteriorates so significantly because the coach isn't involved. That's not the way college football is supposed to be played at all. College football is supposed to be this sport that is amazing for 12 weeks, and instead it's great for 8 and terrible for the last 4. There's got to be a fix put in place. And I don't know what the answer is, but at this point in college football, we have active tampering with players. I know of a really talented group of 5 player that's already been offered $125,000 to go to a Power 5 team, and he's probably going to take it. He's probably going to take it. There's another quarterback, the quarterback for Washington State. Like, why is this information even available? The quarterback for Washington State has 10 different $1 million offers to go somewhere else. And the coaches are getting this stuff too. Mike Elko is going into a game with Pittsburgh. You think he doesn't know he's already taken the A&M job? Of course he knows. Of course he knows. He knew it last week before the UVA game. They got crushed by UVA. There's got to be a fix put in place because it's literally impacting the play and the watchability of a number of college football teams. We're seeing this across the board. We're even seeing this with coaches who don't take the jobs. Remember Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss last year? They were awful the entire month of November. Why? His name was in the running for that Auburn job. He didn't even take it. And the play for Ole Miss still deteriorated. Mel Tucker, Michigan State. USC was after him. All of a sudden, Michigan State falls off a cliff. He starts thinking about that job. He starts preparing his roster. He starts thinking about how he's going to organize practices. He's, in his mind, already figured out he's left. And he ends up staying. But his team, his record completely deteriorates. And in that instance, so many players were upset about it. They transferred and left, and Michigan State hasn't been able to recover since for a job their coach ended up not taking. There's got to be more regulation over this. And this will be the only time ever in the history of anything you'll ever hear me preach about more regulation of anything. But this is just the wild, wild west. And it helps nobody. It frustrates fans to no end. And I just can't help but feel for the players. Like the players for Duke today. I mean, to be told your coach was already taking another job. The players for Liberty last year. To be prepping for a game in the morning before the game to be told your coach is taking the Auburn job. What are you doing? This does not work. And I think the NCAA, and they're not going to do anything because they're the most passive-aggressive organization there is. I think the NCAA or somebody has to do something to fix it because this is making college football in the month of November nearly unwatchable in half of these games. Absolutely awful. All right. That is your Fourth String Podcast. We will be back soon. Have a good night.